Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Backtrekking, the podcast where we look back at the real-world inspirations behind classic episodes of Star Trek. I'm one of your hosts, Caliban, and what I want to know is, how do you fake a leopard attack? I'm joined on this episode by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Gooey Fame, and I can feel it.
I can feel it coming. In space tonight, we've returned to explore the stories behind your favorite Trek tales, and today we're talking about two stories of artificial intelligences going rogue and how the humans they serve choose to cope with it. It's the 1968 sci-fi film classic 2001: A Space Odyssey and the fourth season Star Trek Discovery episode, But to Connect. I don't know if you heard the ellipses. I want to make sure that the ellipses came
I
out.
appreciate that. I appreciate the extra effort.
But to Connect. Yes. Big one today. And before I get completely cowed by the idea of what we're talking about, let's move directly on to talk about Halloween. How was your Halloween?
Well, good. I watched the movie that we're going to be talking about.
Oh, okay.
And so it wasn't, I've actually was on a good streak of watching. I watched a lot more movies than normal this past month. A lot of, spooky or spooky adjacent movies. So this wasn't exactly that sort of vibe, but it's scary enough, but it fit perfectly in line, I think, with the season. And then as soon as the movie was done, we look at our window and we've got some little Halloween lights and decorations up, but it was also extremely foggy outside. And it was like, ooh, it's a Halloween miracle, I said. And so it was nice. It was nice.
Yeah, a little bit of atmosphere. Yeah, it kind of dovetails into a conversation that we've had on the show before, which is like, can sci-fi be scary, especially cerebral sci-fi? And I guess Hal is, in a way, a monster in this film, and he's kind of pulling off scary things. There's a feeling of dread, certainly, both with, the ominous way in which he starts to deal with the crew of the Discovery. The Discoveries in both of our entries today, I should point out. Not a coincidence. And also it's like he becomes the victim, Dave becomes the monster later on when he's basically just like taking an axe to his computer bank. And he's like, no, please, I'm scared. I'm afraid, Dave.
Yeah, it's sad.
So both the aggressor and the victim, but aren't we all? In our own way.
Yeah, very, I feel like it's a very human portrayal of the character, yeah.
Speaking of aggressors who play victims, how's Twitter going for you? Twitter is a whole new world now and a whole new universe. Or maybe it's the same hell site that it's ever been now that Elon Musk has taken control of the site.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not really been different. I'm just posting the same thing. It's just people are complaining about who's in charge, but isn't it always, I feel like it's always going to be owned by some sicko anyway. So, I wasn't like, oh, this is unlike the previous owner of Twitter, who I'm sure was awesome.
Jack Dorsey was not great, but he pretended to be great.
It's actually kind of fun just because I see him pitching something new he's going to roll out every day that obviously isn't going to happen.
Worst ideas.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's funny.
I don't know which is worse, like the guys like Jack Dorsey who, ride a cruelty-free electric cycle to work or whatever and pretend to be good, or just the mask-off weirdos like Elon Musk and his apartheid wealth. I'm not sure which is worse. I guess I would probably guess the second one, but something that I don't understand is I know that he, when you drop $46 million on something, you basically own it, but they are publicly traded, right? So he does, doesn't he have, if as the majority shareholder, I guess, does he not have to listen to anybody? Don't they have to have shareholder meetings? Doesn't he have to run all of his dumb ideas by a board that's going to go, I don't know, why don't you just make another rocket or something? That's kind of a dumb idea.
Well, probably. And also he just can't do any of the things he probably wants to do.
Oh no, everything. He is 100% talk. He is that kid back in school who's like, yeah, my dad's an astronaut, so he's gone a lot, he's got a pretty cool car, and it's all this stuff. He's just lying. Everything he says is a lie. It's not true. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe there won't be any changes at all. He's already talked about wanting to democratize blue checks, which of course means that, and look, I'm not for elitism online, but if you democratize it and let people buy blue checks, then they don't really mean anything. They mean that you have $8 a month is what they mean. So
I think they should do that.
his streak
I
of
think
bad
if you want a
ideas.
blue check so bad, you should lose.
Well, he's monetizing.
You should lose money.
He wants more money. Yeah. Like there are people who need money, who grift because, the wolf's at the door, and there's people who just have untold sums of wealth, and yet they're still on that grind. And so you got to give him that at least. I was thinking about like access and the fact that he wants to let everybody in and reduce restrictions. And somebody pointed out like the idea that when you see a article about how crime like hasn't gone up appreciably statistically, or how some activist judge somewhere is like making it illegal to talk to gay people or whatever, it's always like on Bloomberg.com and there's a paywall and you don't want to pay the paywall, so you just don't read the article.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas whatever crazy claims that Newsmax or Fox News is making about how black people smell different or whatever, there is never any paywall on those. You can get right through to that. And so, again, like, there is no such thing as ethical capitalism, but we see how like the capitalist motive puts restrictions on important information and makes trash free. And that's a problem too. And I wonder how that will compare to the signal to noise ratio that we're probably going to see change as Musk takes over on Twitter.
I think there's some, I can't remember, this is not an original thought, but like someone pointed out that like the idea of he wants to bring back like free speech and you can say whatever you want. It's like, I think most sites that have tried to do that have all failed, because of safety reasons or whatever. You just can't. Yeah. No one's going to want to advertise on your company where like, death threats and like doxing is allowed. So like he can't bring back any of the people or like let them do the things people want them to do.
Well, you can. Like there's been a great example of that just this past week. Like welcome back to Twitter, Kanye West. Homeless person talking about the Jews, basically. Like Kanye has essentially destroyed all of his endorsement deals and his corporate connections with his loose talk. And so you can say whatever you want. Like there is a freedom for speech. There's just not a freedom from consequence.
So that's why I think like don't get bent out of shape about it. I think you should enjoy people who are like, Mr. Musk, can you look into this for me? And he'll be like, I am currently researching your claim or whatever. And it's like, just enjoy that because he's like, you should know that he's lying to that person and you should enjoy that all these idiots think he's going to help them. I think
I want to see. Yeah. He starts off like, I will personally be reviewing every single one of these. And then like, how soon he quits and just hands it off to the board of moderation that he wants to.
I don't even think he's going to try it. Yeah, he's probably not even going to try it.
Yeah, why even bother? Plenty of more terrible ideas to come up with.
The worst thing that can happen is the site shuts down, and that's not even a bad thing. Like, I saw...
well, the worst thing that can happen is that he can platform, a bunch of these cuckoo birds. Already we're going into the midterm elections, and then we've got a presidential and another set of elections coming up in 2 years.
Yeah, well, I think though, like we said, like I think that most of that stuff, like... Well, I guess there's already, I think the amount of like misinformation or whatever will probably stay probably a healthy amount to the same, which is not good, but I think that's already kind of an issue on all these sites,
Yeah. It kind of gets to the core of like, what is your opinion then about the platforms that these kooks have? Like when Marjorie Taylor Greene talks about Jewish space lasers, is she just talking to the people who already believe that, or is she converting people who are sort of on the fringe?
Oh, I'm sure there's some people, who probably are like, well, there's a lot of, I do my own research type people, and their research is reading these weird Facebook or Twitter threads, Yeah,
because I mean, if you take away her access to online platforms, she's going to go stand on a street corner with a bullhorn and just say the exact same thing.
Right. Yeah.
And, we have people like that in my town and I walk away. I cross to the other side of the street. Like people like that exist. But we can't, I don't think, argue the influence that people like this can have.
Mm-hmm. Oh no! I just my argument was more that it's already pretty bad, and that's not going to change with just like, I think it'll change marginally. It'll probably be a little bit worse, but I think overall, what I think actually needs to happen is the internet and social media should be democratized and not run by like these companies, these weirdos, you know. Well, overall, you know, capitalism in general, I think is bad for the spread of information. And I think whether it changes hands from Musk to someone else, like, I think it's going to be generally be shitty.
Yeah.
It's just going to be some, you know, it's like Facebook or whatever has been the same, run by the same guy forever, and it's a horrible cesspool, you know.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't get to decide. They shouldn't get to decide that stuff. I think that I don't know, the internet is like a public service, and I think it should be personally, I think it should be nationalized or something like that. I'm not like that smart.
Well,
so.
Yeah, I don't disagree in practice. You know, if you think about something, and this feels familiar, we might have talked about this on the show before, but like at this point, when you've got something like Facebook, when you've got something like Twitter, when you've got like one major avenue to communicate with other people that has this, that's when we talk about nationalization,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if you wanted to call grandma back in the day and Ma Bell said that'll be $50 to talk to grandma on Thanksgiving, you're like, I don't have any other way to talk to her. It's a phone. And so the government says, no, this is now regulated, right? If not nationalized outright. And so, yeah, I mean, if there's only Facebook, which is the way that we talk to grandma now, or Twitter, the way that we talk to friends and other people, maybe that's true. I think, you know, if the market was really working, then somebody could just say, okay, obviously Twitter is the premier place where this all happens. They might have patents that make Twitter work that aren't accessible or could be licensed to other people for a lot of money. But some other billionaire would just create something. And they've tried to do that with things like Parler and Telegraph and whatever, and it doesn't really work. And even like former owners of Twitter, people like Jack Dorsey, have been even though he's nominally like a liberal, although he's a rich person first, of course, he's been very, very reluctant to deplatform people because he wants everybody to have access to his thing. He doesn't want some other rich person to go, well, you know what? I'm going to make another thing, a competitor for Twitter. If there's no competitor, then yeah, he has a monopoly on the social economy.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. Until if Elon had just made his own thing, he could have done it for however much money he wanted to, and maybe had a Twitter competitor. But instead, he talked shit. And he got hit, and now
I don't think
he owns.
That's
the
why
thing.
I don't think he ever wanted to run his own thing. I think he barely even wanted to run Twitter. You know what I mean? Like, I think it was just talking shit because everyone hates him, and he's tired of logging on, and he's like, "Oh, I just want to post memes," and he logs on, and it's about, like probably 4,000 people saying like, "Fuck you, shut the hell up," you know?
Yeah, he entered Twitter headquarters carrying a sink. So he could say, Elon's here, let that sink in. It's just like, wow. We are approaching levels of cringe unknown.
Yeah, that's true too.
To humanity.
Yeah, that'll be it's going to be very embarrassing for sure.
So, all right. Well, I can't wait till he falls on his face and then, you know, nukes somebody or does something else stupid. But we'll have an update of when that happens, of course, on the show. Because this is Elon Trekking. But let's just get into it and get into our featured subject for this week's episode. And I mean, I'll say it. How do you talk about 2001? It's one of, if not the most influential science fiction films of all time. It was directed by one of the most influential filmmakers of all time, written by one of the most influential authors of all time. It's got some of the most iconic visuals of all time, some of the most quotable lines of all time, and one of the most unforgettable soundtracks of all time, but to connect. The vast amount of words written about 2001 is inversely proportional to the film's terse dialogue. There's a lot of silence in this film, I'm telling you. Something that's not often highlighted, however, is the film's connection to the world of Star Trek. Both were released in the late 1960s during the race to space and the moon by the world's powers. Both deal not with the laser, zappy, alien-infested stories of pulp sci-fi, but are instead a deeper exploration of man's connection to the cosmos and to other life forms, and to themselves. And Gene Roddenberry has specifically cited the influence of Kubrick's film in the philosophy and feel of Star Trek, sharing Clarke's disdain for mysticism and religion, his objective view of a universe without humanity at its center, and even the idea of a prime directive that respects the autonomy of other races. It might not be the best podcast episode of all time, but let's have a discussion about 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh yeah, could we even achieve best podcast about 2001 of all time? I think that's probably even hard.
We can try. We can try.
Well, I'll give it my best. I'm not going to make excuses.
I was not going to do anything. I was not going to look up anything. I watched the movie and I kind of noodled around on the Wikipedia, but I wasn't going to go too deep because I wanted to just talk about the film because we're never going to cover everything.
Yeah.
But just by happenstance, what's that podcast? Blank Check, the movie podcast, just covered this because they're covering Kubrick, and they had a similar sort of attitude. They're like, I don't know, what do we even talk about? What do we do?
Wow,
it's just been covered. But luckily, we have a connection specifically to the world of Star Trek. There's a famous thing that Arthur C. Clarke said, a quote of his, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. That always gets touted around. But he also said something else about alien life. He said that there's two possibilities. We're either alone in the universe or we're not, and both are terrifying. And that communicates that idea of being afraid of the unknown, being afraid of the possibility of the unknown or the possibility of nothingness. Either there are other aliens out there that are strange to us, that might be hostile to us, that might be far advanced in technology, or even be less developed than us and then present us a moral quandary in how we deal with them. Or there's the idea that we're just kids in a big empty warehouse and there is nothing here and there will be nothing and we will come and we will go and that will be it. Both of those things are psychically horrifying.
Yeah, and I like that the movie does convey that sort of dread or that feeling of what either could mean, and I like that it sort of even makes it seem that it's just so it's ambiguous, so it's just kind of either could even be true and give you almost the exact same feeling,
Yeah. Something that he focused on in some of his stories, and specifically the story of the Sentinel, which was the inspiration for this film, is the idea that, there's the there's the, I guess it's old, the Fermi paradox, the idea of where is everybody, right? If we know that there are millions of planets and millions of solar systems, and there's been plenty of time, look how far we've come, in the few billion years that we've had as organisms, then we should see somebody. Even with the distances involved, we should see something. And Clarke was specifically focused on the idea, not that we would necessarily see other aliens, beep booping around, but we would see evidence of them. We'd see their artifacts. We'd see their technology. We'd see their probes. We'd see something. And in his story, The Sentinel, it specifically deals with that. It's set on the moon, probably around, the time that this movie came out, or was set, in the early 21st century. And it's about an astronaut who sees something weird on the moon, and he goes and to check it out, and it's this weird artifact. It's this pyramid, and he realizes, oh shit, we're wondering if we're alone in the universe. They've already been here. There is dust on this thing from millions of years ago. They came and went a long time ago. So it's kind of having your cake and eating it too, as far as that question goes. There are other aliens, there are other people in the universe, but we are also alone because of the vast distances and the vast distances of time between us.
Not only that, but I think to what I was trying to say earlier is that even though in the movie, for example, even though we find these obelisks or whatever, and similar to the pyramid, we think they say this is proof of existence in other worlds, but like when the character goes into it, like he can't even comprehend like what is happening or what it is, you know. So I feel like
Yeah.
that's just as scary too, is like they've come and
Yeah.
gone, and we can't even really tell, like, you know, what is this.
Yeah. That's the kind of, and you have to read Clark's other fiction to get more of an idea of, his idea of the connection or the meetings between aliens and humans. But I think that's the sort of clinical cynicism of Stanley Kubrick coming through. The idea that we then make this connection, and Dave doesn't know what's going on, and apparently the aliens don't know what to do with him. Like they just give him some dinner, and he's living in a weird room, and then he dies. But then he does become a space baby at the end, and it's almost the kind of careful optimism of Clark and the sort of galactic cynicism of Kubrick join forces in that ending to make it completely ambiguous, because Space Baby's back, and are we in trouble, or is he going to help us all? Do you know what I mean? And there are more books and there are more movies, but if you just consider this thing as an artifact into itself, like, what does it mean? Like, where are they going?
Is the Space Baby good? Yeah. Well, I think that even
Is the Space Baby good?
that's
the t-shirt.
That's probably like, if the movie came out now, there would be an article called 2001 ending explained : is the Space Baby good?
Oh,
and
yeah.
It would be trying to answer
right.
all of this canonically.
Right. And there wouldn't even be a Space Baby until like season 3. Like at the end, in a post-credit scene at the end of the first season, somebody would go, "What's a Space Baby?" And then we would have to build up to where the Space Baby is.
Yes.
But first we have to see how Hal is built, though.
Do you think it's meant to, because, like, I mean, there's a connection there about, like, the first time there's the obelisk there. I don't know what analysis has been done on this movie before, other than talking to my friends.
Endless analysis.
But, like,
yeah.
okay, so the obelisk shows up, it's the dawn of man or whatever, and like these apes, essentially, it's like the start of how we're using tools to kill stuff or whatnot. So
Sure.
it could just be saying, like, maybe it's not even like a moral judgment on if it's good or bad. It's just, it's changed. Like, apes eventually changed into humans, and now humans are changing into something else. Maybe it's not even like a moral thing. It's just showing, like, hey, things are, like, life evolves and changes and goes different ways.
Yeah. And what is the source of that change and that evolution? What is the power behind it? Obviously, it's survival, just the sort of the inner workings and the expression of evolution. But it's almost like this. When I was watching I've seen, we've all seen this a million times. And so I was watching it recently, and I hadn't seen it in a while. And I was just thinking, like, it's like, yeah, the chimps see the chimps, whatever they are, Australopithecus, early man. They see the monolith and they don't know what it is, and they aren't like immediately bowing to it. They don't like treat it like a god, but it's kind of like a science god. You know what I mean? It sort of gives them fire in a way. It gives them like the knowledge of tools, and in the future of the film, there is this being out in space that we're looking to reach, and it just makes me think, like, this is science god that we're talking about here. Even though Clark was not religious, and he said specifically, like, when I die, I don't want a funeral, I don't want anything, just put me in the ground, give me a nice headstone, and that's it. Like, I'm not into this. And Kubrick was also an atheist, but it's interesting how they want to make this. They collaborated on this narrative that is really a search for God. Kubrick said in an interview with Rolling Stone that the quote, "On the deepest psychological level, the film's plot symbolizes the search for God, and it postulates what is little less than a scientific definition of God. It revolves around the metaphysical conception and the hardware and the documentary feelings that about everything that was necessary to undermine the built-in resistance to the poetical concept." So he wanted to take a film that isn't just like, oh, my father is dying of cancer, and yet I meet someone, and ultimately I, feel closer to God. Like, he was trying to get rid of all that lyrical, poetical stuff and search for God, but start off by saying, look, forget about God. I want to make a film that is about the search for meaning and understanding in the universe. Now, people who are religious would say, well, you're just searching for God. But he's proposing the idea that, no, I can search for that. Just because I'm an atheist doesn't mean I can't search for, a higher metaphysical feeling in my life.
Yeah, and
I kind of like that. He's like taking some of that real estate back from something that's more ecclesiastical in nature.
I think it shows, that how you can draw meaning from like scientific reality, like things that we do know, and how you can find meaning in what we do know and understand without jumping to conclusions about creators and stuff like that.
Yeah. And we'll talk about it more later, but it also occurs to me that, like, if you want to connect this to Star Trek, the monolith aliens are kind of like the Star Trek people. They're like the Federation, and we're kind of like the uncontacted, species. They're sort of like doing they initially sort of uplift us by giving us tools. That's interference, I guess. But then they sort of step back and go, all right, when they make it to the moon and they uncover this thing, then, it'll send us a signal and say, now they're spacefaring now. So maybe you want to go back and see what's going on with them at that point. That's something that is repeated endlessly in Star Trek.
Yeah, I sort of wonder too if in the movie, like, you could even say, like, are they bringing these tools, or I feel like it could just be like they just maybe it's just both. They symbolize like the ushering in of a new era, so like they might not even be like doing anything. It's probably, I think it's just portraying, like, you can take that in a very non-literal way. It doesn't have to be the movie saying like these are gods necessarily.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just aliens that we haven't figured out how to talk to.
Yeah, in the later books, there's a 2010, there's a 2061, and there's a 3001 that Clark wrote, and they don't relate. They relate differently to the novelization of the film and the film itself, but there does develop a more of an idea of the aliens want to like connect with us, but they're also sort of watching us. If we're going to do something crazy, like try to nuke, if we're going to become a dangerous species, then they're going to take us out. And so that is sort of there. This was, of course, written at the dawn, or this was like written and conceived under the threat of nuclear annihilation, I guess, but still at the sort of tail end of the optimism of the atomic age. But of course, as the years went on, I think Clark was like, no, it's probably a mutually assured destruction metaphor. Let's talk about Clark. He is one of the big three of 20th century science fiction, the two others being Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, who we've both talked about on the show previously. Unlike the other two of the big three, he's seemingly completely unproblematic in contrast to them. So there's nothing to really talk about. In fact, he was gay, or at least he had relationships with both men and women. When journalists asked if he was gay, he'd say, no, I'm just mildly cheerful. He was married briefly in 1953, but remained separated from his wife until their divorce was finalized in 1964. And in 1956, he emigrated to Sri Lanka to continue writing and open a scuba diving school. He really liked scuba diving. And actually made a couple like discoveries in the area. And we don't know much else. Yeah, he was always like, because like when you think of, they train astronauts in water, and water is, of course, the ocean is like the undiscovered sort of frontier on Earth. So I think that fits. We don't know much else about his personal life, and it would be irresponsible to speculate. But he did live with a Sri Lankan man in the 70s, and he was actually buried alongside him after his death in 2008. And I've seen it speculated that Clark moved to Sri Lanka because they didn't have the UK's draconian laws against LGBTQ individuals. But I have not been able to back that up with any research into attitudes about homosexuality in Sri Lanka. In fact, as a colonial territory of the UK, I would assume they would have the exact same laws. And I think that speculation connected to that is, connected to the perception of the South Seas as being a haven for sex tourism. And lest you think that Elon Musk has ever done anything original in his life, the British tabloid The Mirror accused Clark of paying Sri Lankan boys for sex in 1998, which led to the cancellation of his planned knighthood by Prince Charles that year. But the Sri Lankan government found the claim to be completely baseless, and the Mirror apologized, and Clark was subsequently knighted in the year 2000.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Glad it worked out, I guess.
Yes.
Glad
So
you got that knighthood. I'm sure that was very important.
thumbs up. Yeah. So we got everything flipped around here. Let's talk about how his life began. He was born in 1917 and raised in Somerset, England, and was interested in space and sci-fi from an early age. And he loved American pulp magazines. And he attributed his interest in science fiction specifically to reading three things: the November 1928 issue of Amazing Stories. That must have been a good one. The book Last and First Men by Olaf Stapledon, and The Conquest of Space by author David Lasser. He served in the RAF in World War II as a radar specialist, and he eventually reached the rank of flight lieutenant. And after the war, he got a degree in mathematics, and he became a president of the British Interplanetary Society. He also wrote a number of nonfiction technical books related to rocketry and spaceflight. And he was pivotal in the development of the science of using geostationary satellites as communication devices, and also in the promotion of the exploration of space. Reportedly, it was his 1951 book, The Exploration of Space, that Wernher von Braun used to convince Kennedy that the U.S. could go to the moon in the 60s. And he himself was a commentator for CBS News during the space race, and specifically during the Apollo 11 moon landing. So he was something of an early science communicator at that time, and he hosted a series of TV programs about scientific topics in the 80s and 90s. Some of his most famous works were written in the 50s, like The City and the Stars, Childhood's End, and A Fall of Moondust, which came out in 1961. In 1948, he wrote a short story for a BBC contest called The Sentinel. The story was rejected, but it would go on to form the basis of his novelization of 2001: A Space Odyssey and of the film itself. In 1964, Clark met with Stanley Kubrick, and at this time, this is post Dr. Strangelove, Kubrick decided that he wanted to make the quote-unquote proverbial good science fiction film. Emphasis
Okay.
on the proverb, the idea that Stanley Kubrick has not done a sci-fi film yet, so we're going to make this a good one. And after working together, they settled on The Sentinel as the inspiration for the story, although several other Clark stories, namely the short story Encounter in the Dawn, provided a framework during their brainstorming sessions. They decided to try and write a novel and let the novel and the process of writing it inspire the shape of the film, which might have been a little optimistic because, first, it's no easy thing to write a book, especially one with the scope of 2001. And of course, many of the elements of a film have to be worked out in pre-production long before the film's ever shot. So the book and the screenplay were developed essentially at the same time, leading to some discrepancies between the narrative of the film and the narrative of the book. But essentially, they are kind of the same thing. And I've read, I don't think Kubrick has said this, but I think Clark has said this, that, you know, when you should watch the film, and then if you've got questions, you should read the book. And then if you're confused, you should watch the film. And then if you enjoyed the film, you should read the book. So Clark has always been very positive and kind of bullish about their collaboration. Kubrick, maybe not so much. I think Kubrick had this idea to make the science fiction film, and he didn't exactly know what he was getting into. I think at one point he actually he got frustrated with Clark and wanted to like replace him as the consultant, and ended up going to a lot of people in the industry who were, of course, Clark's friends, people like Michael Moorcock and Heinlein, and was like, "What, do you want to work on this?" And they're like, I'm not going to take my friend's job. Go back and work with him again. Like, we're not going to.
So he did not like working with him.
No, but he also did. He didn't like working with anybody. At one point, they brought in Carl Sagan to consult, because Carl Sagan, of course, was also kind of a science communicator and author, and they wanted to figure out what the aliens would look like. That was really important. And Sagan basically told them, like, look, knowing what we know about how weird aliens would be, and also what we've seen of aliens in past films, you probably should just not depict them, or at least depict them very abstractly, because otherwise it's going to seem silly. Anything's going to seem silly or dated in a short amount of time. And Kubrick was like, oh, fuck that. Kubrick was all mad about that. And so he went back and tried to go through a couple different designs. And at one point he wanted to have like a ballet dancer be a representative of the alien. And then eventually he realized that Sagan was right. And it was
Yeah,
like,
I was gonna say.
I'll just have them be in the background of what's going on. Yeah.
So it sounds like he got frustrated, but then like he was like he's willing to accept a good idea.
Oh yeah, but also, you know, people have argued back and forth about him being an egomaniac, and certainly his imprimatur is on all of his films. Like, this is a Stanley Kubrick production. This isn't a collaboration. The buck stops here. He famously won the Academy Award for his supervision of the visual effects, which is ironic because working under him and supervising those effects was Douglas Trumbull, the guy who would go on to influence every single sci-fi and space movie ever after this, who himself never won an Academy Award for anything.
Didn't give credit where credit's due.
It's Stanley's show and Stanley's shop, yeah. But I do think that if ultimately he knows like what a good idea is, and he's so like, yeah, fine, all right.
Yeah, it's funny you said he's like, okay, I'm gonna make the the perfect sci-fi movie. Like, he did kind of call his shot a little bit, and it worked, you know.
It did, and you're right. You're right.
Like,
and the reason
did he say that before, like The Shining too? Because I feel like that's also the case. So, like, I don't know. You gotta give him some credit here.
if you wanna, so this movie was somewhat mixed in its reception. Many of Kubrick's films have been mixed in their reception. So if you want to come on Craft to Services and talk about how Kubrick's mystique contributes to the appreciation of his films, I'm totally open to that.
Okay, yeah.
That being said, I don't know. I think that the clear artistry on display has helped this film in its continuing people's continuing appreciation of it. I think it's the idiosyncratic depiction of its world, you know, at this time, and I think that they've said, so why did Kubrick want to make a space movie? It's been theorized that it was specifically films like The Forbidden Planet, you know, possibly the previous quote unquote good science fiction movie. The scope of it, the themes that it attacks, it isn't just a monster from space, you know, with a big eye. Like, it is dealing with kind of deeper themes. It's very expensive and very nice looking. The idea of that, also apparently like the filmmaking and the cinematography behind some of the Japanese like kaiju movies of the time, the sort of like widescreen bombast of like Godzilla, films like Warning from Space, all of these things we think, because he never really said, were sort of, you know, bubbling in his mind when he went, you know, I want to make like this huge CinemaScope, you know, widescreen epic. That's all kind of in the mix, I think, when he sits down to say, okay, but what's it going to be about? And we talked about, you know, him working with Clark. Also, Chariots of the Gods was released in 1968 as well. The book that like suggests that, or basically collects a bunch of ideas about how humanity may have been influenced by ancient astronauts, you know, aliens coming to us in olden timey days, which came out concurrently with Trek, but I think those ideas definitely influenced Trek in episodes like Who Mourns for Adonais, the one with the Sargon, Return to Tomorrow, I think, or Cat's Paw. I always go to Cat's Paw.
Right, cats. Okay, yeah.
You can never go wrong going to Cat's Paw. Giant cats.
It's a huge episode, whether people want to admit it or not, you know.
You know, it is. We talked about it last year for Halloween.
Yeah.
But it is. It's just too bad that it's so sillily executed, you know. It's kind of silly and strange, and you got a guy wearing a Gilligan's Island costume and a black cat and a witch.
Mm-hmm.
But the underlying ideas are interesting, that there are these like aliens that exist in sort of a mental space, and they're sort of, you know, connecting with something deeper in the psychology of humanity. Which is what we get in like the last maybe 10, 15 minutes of this movie, but there's a lot that happens before we get there.
Yeah, no, it's almost like bunch of little vignettes too, which I think is cool. Like there's a bunch
Yeah.
of movies within the movie almost.
If this was made now, you would say, Act One, The Dawn of Man. It is essentially broken up into acts by the title cards, but you'd be a little more
But
self-conscious about that.
each does kind of propel the overall themes forward and the story forward. You know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
all feel like one. It does feel like one story, even though it's like first it's a nature documentary, then it's about some guy, and then it's about these other guys. It's like
Yeah.
yeah, no one like that's I feel like no one would watch this and like I don't know. I feel like this is like criticism proof. You know what I mean? Maybe that's
Well,
just
yeah.
me watching it and like knowing what I know about the movie, but just
It,
feels like
well,
it's so different than what
yeah.
people would expect from a movie today. But I also cannot imagine someone complaining about it. And if they do, I would lose my
Oh
mind.
man, it sucks. Well, man, you could say that it's slow. It's a little too cerebral and cold emotionally, certainly. But it has almost, it's got over 50 years of plot armor of being, one of the main characters of cinematic history at this point.
Yeah. It's main character syndrome.
But I do think that I think it being so successful, so well known, and so widely watched, and also being very esoteric, and once again, here we are. We haven't even talked about the plot yet. We're talking about just the ramifications and the effects of the film. Like that's what I was worried about. But I think that it has contributed to film analysis in that it isn't that tough to figure out what's happening. But if you just watch the movie and you don't think about how things are connected, you're like, why are we doing cavemen? Okay, astronauts, I get this. He's flying through Laser Floyd or something, and then he's eating dinner or something, right? If you don't, looking back now, every film school kid, it's printed on the top of the syllabus, like it's the dawn of man, it's the evolution of man's, instrumentality and blah, blah, blah. And, we understand all that. But if you just watch this in 1968, with a belly full of pie, you'd be like, what the hell is going on? What is any of this here?
Yeah. It could be. Maybe it is just because I've seen it before or something like that. But
yeah. It's one of those things that you can't remove your knowledge of it. Like you just get like, oh, the bone is the spaceship. Like I got it.
though I remember. I don't know. I watched this when I was really dumb for the first time, like
Me
dumber
too.
than I am now, and I still remember just at the time. Maybe it's because it has the mystique too, because you're saying someone at the time. But I don't know. I just remember watching it and it all clicking, and I felt smart when I first watched it because it was like esoteric or whatever, but like I got it. Like everything clicked. That was like
Yeah.
a movie that even when I was at my dumbest, it was like, whoa.
I feel that way about David Lynch's stuff. I love David Lynch.
Yeah.
And I love him for a lot of reasons, but you watch some of his stuff and you go, what? But then you just watch it again, or maybe you read a little article about it and you're like, oh, everything, all the symbols in his films and like what they're about is so clear. They're just obscured by little people actors dancing or like a cowboy or something like that. Like they aren't that tough to figure out. And maybe that contributes to their popularity and their acceptance. I don't know. Maybe that's true of this as well. But I definitely, the first time I watched it, I didn't really get it, and I was just scared of Hal. Like I just thought that Hal was the idea of a computer,
True.
your house, your spaceship, essentially trying to kill you was kind of scary to me.
I think what really the first time I watched it got me thinking about it is that part of the movie it is so long. Like, the amount with the apes, that when I first saw it I was like this ape stuff is going on for a while, this has got to mean something, and I was like immediately I was like, this is something's fishy here, but it immediately got me thinking about like,
hold it right there, apes.
I was like, oh, it's like, it clicked in my head. I was like, oh, it's symbolic, and I was like, oh man,
Yeah,
I'm so smart.
One more word about critics, and then we'll move on to something else. But it's funny that the interpretation, or at least the reception of the film, between the audience and the critics was very different. And I think for that reason, we got to do this on 2001 at some point. So, book something early next year and we'll do it. But critics in light of his last film, Dr. Strangelove, saw it as a very pessimistic tale that the space baby was here to smack Earth around. Like, look out, Earth, this is it for you. Like, this is your apotheosis. But audiences saw it as being optimistic, that, he was being reborn, that he was there to effect some change, to do something for Earth. And one thing that Kubrick did throughout the making of the film was remove things to make it more obscure. He took all the texts, all the Rosetta Stones away. Clark is not necessarily a wordy guy, but he definitely had dialogue, he had descriptions, and Kubrick purposefully took out as much as possible, even to the point where near the end, in the final cut, he took out the specificity of the space stations that we see at the beginning of the modern sequence being orbital weapons platforms. This is a world where they don't have the space weapons treaties or SALT or START or anything like that. So like the Cold War has continued into 2001, and we're literally pointing nukes at each other, from space. And one of the scripted, I don't think shot, but one of the scripted final scenes was that the Star Child would return and would destroy these orbital platforms with its power. And it was a very, anti-war tale. In the vein of a Dr. Strangelove. But Kubrick said, no, let's take that out. Let's have people we're going to ask them a question. The question is, space baby. The answer is up to the audience.
Yeah, and just, it really actually, I think, is in line more than with, like, the idea of questioning the nature of humanity, in that it's a little bit more vague and up to interpretation, whereas if you're talking about, like, an anti-war thing, like, that's a part of it, but it feels a little bit more specific.
Yeah, and I think that Kubrick, that's the way that he wants to communicate ideas, but it works out to making his films very attractive as well. If Dr. Strangelove had just been a harangue about how futile war is, which, I mean, it essentially is, but it's all cloaked in like this black comedy, it becomes very entertaining and attractive. And if the baby had been like, don't do the nukes, at the end, it would have been much less fascinating and successful. And we've got an example. We've got 2010, the year we make contact, the follow-up, 1984 follow-up, which is fun. I like it. I think it's a fun 1980s sci-fi movie, but it is much more like, don't do the nukes, don't do it, and not quite as alluring and mesmerizing as 2001 is.
Yeah, there's definitely room for that kind of story, but I feel like the way this communicates that stuff more ambiguously, it like serves this movie very well,
Yeah. How do you fake a leopard attack? These are men. These are actors in ape costumes, right? Just hanging around. And then at one point, a leopard attacks one and just goes ham on this guy. And it's like, there's no stunt leopard. Like, it doesn't come out of a trailer. Yeah. You just sick a leopard on a guy, right? I hope did somebody interview that guy? Did he survive that? Did we check on that guy? Is he okay?
It was a trained animal, an actor leopard.
Speaking of alien movies and we don't understand aliens, I don't know if you've seen Nope, but it's, you got to be careful with real life wild animals. That hit me a lot different than any past viewing. Actually,
does anyone know who that was, or like what his deal was?
Yeah, I don't know. I love knowing things about things, but I often resist being the person who just dives all the way down to bedrock, with all the facts.
Who was the leopard attack ape?
I'm glad I don't necessarily recommend it, but I'm speaking of Kubrick, but I'm glad that I watched the documentary Room 237 to know what it looks like when you reach conspiracy bedrock in terms of like filmmaking and what people are trying to communicate through media. Did you ever see that?
No, I actually I want to see that, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's weird. But anyway, I don't know. I hope Leopard Guy's okay. He's probably
It's
alive
probably all
still.
right.
Yeah. So pretty straightforward. The now straightforward. The sequence with the ape men at the beginning, translating to the modern, or I guess for us, the future. Nope. Now it's the past, isn't it? Oh,
Oh,
time's funny, isn't it?
that reminds me, is another reason that it makes me think of them more as like kind of just being there for these changes of eras, is that like they come and they do their thing, and like, yeah, they admit their signal, maybe their signal is just like giving knowledge or something. But I think what is important in both times, like they show up in the monoliths, like he is that like what actually changes, it doesn't come until like later, you know what I mean? So
Uh-huh.
like it's like they're doing their thing, the noise happens, and then like later on, that's when some guy figures out, oh, I can use a club. And then on the in the moon thing, it's like, oh, they see the monolith, and then it's like cut to 16 months later,
Yeah.
and now we're having like whatever the next phase right now, you know.
Yeah, and it's there is in several of Kubrick's films, I think he um, lampoons or sends up bureaucracy. There, Doctor Strangelove, Clockwork Orange. People making decisions and making bad decisions, and by committee. And in this, we have like a scene like that at the beginning when Haywood goes to the Space Council on the moon or whatever, and he's not really doing that. But it's interesting that they then send Poole and Bowman out to Jupiter on this mission, and they don't tell them anything. And sure, it's sensitive; they don't want this information to get out. But I wonder if that's a commentary on the sort of military-industrial complex, or the way that humans are kind of suspicious of each other during the Cold War, in that they've only told the computer what the real mission is, and it isn't until they get there that the little VHS tape says, "Okay, so here's the real deal." But by then, of course, it's almost it's dramatically ironic that it's just way too late for that
Well,
information to really help anything.
so that's then the question I have. This is maybe too much of the uh ending explained question, but so what do you think the mission was?
To find out what the monolith is, what's going on
Okay.
Jupiter.
I thought maybe too there was like I know like because it's sending all the scientists, but I thought like the fact that they like couldn't tell them, and the computer was clued in, led me to believe that like maybe there was a larger plan that they had enacted that was going to involve Hal, maybe even like communicating with them or something, and that they never got to do that, obviously, because he like killed everybody.
Yeah. And I think in a different movie, I would say a lesser, but in a different movie, there would be a late second act reveal where Hal says that, there's a speech about it. They see a video or read the orders about that. I think that's definitely
No.
possible.
Yeah. Well,
But we don't get that.
I was
Yeah.
thinking more it was meant to like symbolize that like Hal is a key component of this, and maybe that is similar to like Monolith Bone. Maybe you have Monolith like AI communication or something, you know. Maybe I'm digging too much into it, but I feel like Hal or like AI is like that next stage or something into like a greater consciousness. But then again, they just take him in and make him a space baby, so maybe that's all there is to it.
Well, you would not necessarily be totally off base in that. Something that Kubrick said in an interview, and he hated, I don't know if he hated talking about it, but like he did not want to tell anybody the secrets of it. Whenever anybody asked him, like, so what really happened at the end of 2001? He'd be like, yeah, whatever. But he did talk about how the evolution of man, as sort of suggested in this film, would be something from being unintelligent to being intelligent and humanoid to being, possibly a man-machine hybrid. And then the next stage would be being whatever the monolith aliens are, energy beings, unknowable beings, beings that have transcended, our reality. So I think that's all there. What's really interesting is, and it's a funny, sad story, the fate of Hal in this. If 2010 is not a great movie, but it does kind of give Hal like a second act. And I like that for Hal and for what it says about humanity. But it's been pointed out, like the irony of us sort of reaching to this science god, this space god, this sort of next level for us, and yet kind of stepping on the face of our own creation, artificial intelligence, in the process of doing that. The science god, the monolith aliens have given us the fire. They've sort of uplifted us. And in the meantime, we have created our own beings, intelligent machines, and yet we're like, yeah, whatever, we got to get to this monolith thing. And so we're not being good custodians of like our own client, beings.
Yeah, true. Though, I mean, he was acting kind of sketchy.
He was out of pocket. He was definitely out of pocket.
Yeah, sometimes you got to take care of business.
And I love the idea of, and you get this in a lot of, this is like the mid 60s. And I'm not saying that like, ideas can be invented before technology, but like nowadays having Captain Kirk talk a computer to death, catching him in a logic loop, having a computer be programmed with objectives. But then if you can get rid of those objectives, he can really fight crime the best way, RoboCop. This is the mid 60s. And so they have this idea of giving these astronauts a mission, but also giving the computer a mission. But the men can hold in their heads cognitive dissonance. But the computer, as sophisticated and as error-free as it is, hasn't really developed that yet. And so they tell the computer, just do your job, but remember there's this thing that you have to do. And for the computer, he's like, but my primary thing is I'm supposed to tell the truth, and I get praised for telling the truth. So how can I keep this secret, a secret that might be dangerous to them? And then error, and he flips out. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, it becomes like, I feel like that, well, in the episode even, it becomes like kind of the way that a lot of people approach it too. Yeah.
It's something that's totally hand-waved with a character like Data, and we want that because we like Data and we want to see Data pursue his quest to be recognized as human without too much baggage. But Data has ethical subroutines, and it's like, okay, what's that? That's a hand-waving thing that we came up with, so you don't ask why Data doesn't try to kill everybody or just doesn't care about people. At some point, Soong gave him ethical subroutines that can resolve questions like, well, the captain told me that I have to, lie to Wesley because of an intelligence thing. But when Wesley asks me, I'm supposed to tell the truth to my friend. Like, Data can reconcile those things. But Hal 9000, for as smart as he is, does not know how to do that yet.
Yeah. Well, and that, he's an early model,
Yeah.
He's like Lore.
I like the fact that he's super curious, though, and he's super self-protective. That would be something you'd have to program into a machine, I guess. Don't divide by 0. You don't want to, that's suicide for a computer. So he doesn't do things like that. But as soon as he does have emotional intelligence, though. So when he's talking to Frank and Dave, and they're like, no, it's cool. You know what, Hal? Everything's fine. Even Hal's like, I don't think it's fine. And so when they go,
he knows,
when they go to D-Pod, to talk about him behind his back, he's like, those motherfuckers are talking about me.
I think that goes to show like how much they,
and the way that's communicated visually is just so smart. Yeah,
it happens.
So great.
It's like, you feel it. It really, it just makes you feel like being in that moment. I felt like outside, especially because they do all the like POV shots from Hal, is so good.
Yeah, he says at one point that he's, he worries because they're talking to him and he's like talking about emotions and stuff. And I think it's interesting that there's like 2 different birthdays in the film.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah.
Both the daughter of Haywood Floyd and Frank Poole's birthday too, and I think that's supposed to sort of point to ending explained, red circle, arrow, to not only like the birth of Hal as sort of a self-aware being, but the rebirth of the Star Child as well.
It also goes well to what you were saying about like not treating them like these beings we've created necessarily the best, and I think it's like the fact that they kind of take his emotional intelligence for granted, you know. They're like they don't think he would pick up on that, whereas like maybe someone normally would.
Yeah, and he even, I feel like he's almost even trying to clue them in at one point, because they're talking about the mission, and he's sort of talking about the communications thing and some of his reservations, and he's worried that he's projecting anxiety, you know, if he sounds like he's being a worrywart or something.
Yeah.
Kind of like, why would a computer ask that? I feel like he's straining to like, God, I want to tell you guys about the mission so bad, but I can't do it. And that's where he sort of has a short circuit.
Ugh, yeah. Wow. It's so good.
I love, we haven't talked about like the depiction of the technology in this movie. The fact that it's mostly practical technology. You know, there's no gravity in space. They solve that with, in-universe explanations, but also just revolutionary filming techniques. You always see any space thing is going to have the reel of Frank jogging, in the module, and of course the huge turntable drum set that they had to build to make that happen. The floating pen, which is all done, practically. Just amazing, revolutionary, award-worthy special effects in the film. I love the fact that like I was watching the movie, taking notes on my tablet, and then they're sitting and eating their square dinner mush, and they're watching the news. They're watching their interview on their tablets, and I was like, "All right, there you go. Yep, that's how it works."
Yep. Yeah. It's good. It'd been funny though, like, and a newspaper,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think it was a Minority Report. The Stanley Kubrick movie. The Steven Spielberg movie that is very Kubrick inflected. They have the newspapers that are like, oh, it's a newspaper, but it's got like active computer text, like Harry Potter, like things that scroll.
Yeah.
It's like, would anybody do that? Come on, it's dumb.
They should do that.
Have we talked about everything? Let's talk about the last act of the film. But before then, I want to point out that a pod is a spaceship with hands.
Yes, and it doesn't do some punching, but it does some. Well, they don't really. I was gonna say ram.
Maybe
them.
It's too scary. Yeah, it does something to Poole. Yeah, to take him out.
Yeah, but... it's a more of a tackle. That's what I assume happened. It just like
he didn't
boom.
have a knife. Yeah.
Oh, if it had a knife, that'd be good.
Yeah. So Dave's got to shut old Hal down, and you really do. It's weird how much empathy you can have for a completely emotionless voice, and how at this point, Dave is the computer, isn't he? Emotionless to the pleas of Hal, but I guess we understand why he had to do what he had to do. I love it when Hal tells him, "Why don't you just take a stress pill and just think about it?"
I love that part, and like you can see like the different stages he goes through.
Yeah.
Or first he's menacing, but then you realize, oh, he's actually like trying. He's pleading for his life.
Yeah.
Even before it's like super dark, you're like, oh no, he's like, now he knows like he's basically screwed, so he's trying to chill him out, and then he gets a little bit more desperate, and then when his mind is gone and he's singing the song, I cried. I was like, I was watching the movie, I was like, okay, maybe everyone's jumping to conclusions, but like this guy's gotta go. Like if I was them, yeah, you gotta turn this guy off. But then once he started doing it, I was like, oh, but no, he's a guy. No, he's a guy.
Yeah. There's a lot of pathos there. And people always accuse Stanley Kubrick's films of being cold and emotionless and cerebral. I think that there is incredible emotion in many of his films, but the emotion is in the motivation behind the actions, and the people in the films aren't necessarily going full Leonardo DiCaprio and letting it all be on their face, or in their or screaming or shouting about something. Because Dave is terrified, Hal is terrified at what Dave's doing, and you do feel that. But they're both, one's a computer and the other is an astronaut who just has to get this done, and he's not thinking about his dead friend,
Yes.
who's flash frozen by space and all the dead people in the hypersleep coffins. And so, yeah, I wonder if like Leo DiCaprio had ever worked for Kubrick, if he could have got that kind of performance out of him.
Right. Yeah. 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 Definitely possible. I think. Yeah. It's also too. It's just so sparse. Like it doesn't. It's just because it doesn't with the characters like go into every. He's not like, well,
they're professionals.
My daughter. She's dead or whatever, like they just,
you're right. Yeah.
We get a little call or whatever with people's daughters, but like overall I like exactly what you said. It's like we're seeing this moment of their lives and how they react and how they act, and you draw it from their actions mostly.
Yeah. So the final sequence of the film, where he enters the monolith,
it's sick.
does not say, "My God, it's full of stars." He does say that in the book, and that is a plot point of the sequel film 2010, but it's not in this movie. Yeah, that's crazy. There's a whole process as to how they did that I don't know the details of, but I'm sure it was difficult, but an amazing result. And he ends up, I don't know, he sees visions of something. He sees another planet. It's blue, so we know it's an alien planet. And he ends up in this weird space. And I think that Clark went into a little more detail. And I think Kubrick also said in a later interview that it is, these godlike entities, contacted us, invited us in, and then once we got there, didn't really know what to do with us. And so they kind of give an environment to Bowman that, as far as they know, would map onto something he's familiar with, a bed, furniture, some dinner. But his life just sort of, there is no sense of time there. And so it all gets kind of twisted up. But the ending result, of course, is him becoming a super baby. And it wasn't until recently that I kind of got the thing where it's kind of like the creation of Adam, the part of the fresco of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, the thing of Adam sort of laying kind of indolently on the ground, and then God in this big thing in the sky reaching out and their fingers touching. Like when you see, obviously there's the early man touches the monolith, and you see that shot of the sort of planets aligning. It's very similar to I think it's a reference in the end of the opening sequence of Strange New Worlds, the sort of planets almost touching. And it reminded me of fingers almost touching like they do in the creation of Adam.
Yeah. I can see that.
Suggesting this, this connection between God and man. And of course, as Dave is dying, he's very old and dying in the bed, he's sort of reaching out in that same way to touch the monolith. That's when it gets its most arty, I think.
Oh, for sure. Because like you could like if you're at this point and you're not already like on this movie's level, I could see how you'd be like, what is this? What's happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I feel like like I like that idea. I didn't think about that of like we don't know what to do with him. That goes more to what I was thinking too of like this isn't how the mission was supposed to go. Like you weren't supposed to like fly up into this thing. You were supposed to like try and communicate it to it with Hal or something. But
send a radio message through. Just throw yourself in, you dumb human. What now? What?
Yeah. So they're like
some filet mignon.
Like there was a whole like if all went well, it would have been like Arrival or whatever, where they're like, all right, let's have a chat.
Yeah.
Let's figure it out. But now they're just like, well, you're here. You want some cereal?
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. T. And of course Sagan revisits this in his novel in the 70s, Contact. I guess you can't really like borrow big ideas, and so he literally has a human also traveling through a Stargate, ending up with other aliens. Those aliens don't represent themselves as themselves. They take on the forms of people from our lives in order to communicate with us. And it's kind of a more positive thing than whatever it is that happens at the end of this film. But yeah, it's something that really, leaves it leaves you thinking. And I think that there's something telling in the use of the musical piece, also Sprach Zarathustra, named for the philosophical work by Nietzsche, and the idea of the will to power and the idea of sort of, touching this idea, not necessarily of a religious God, but sort of a higher sort of state of being, and developing from, a monkey into a man into, who knows what.
Yeah. And that feels like kind of one of the inspiring messages behind Star Trek is that, even though we come from something like purely biological, maybe not a god, like we can find meaning in our own evolution,
Yeah. And a little bit of entertainment in observing but not interfering with the evolution of other beings.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're like, maybe we are like the monoliths,
I'm glad we didn't talk about the Prime Directive, because we could have talked about that this whole time. Someday we're really going to crack open the Prime Directive.
Yeah, we got to get the ultimate Prime Directive episode, I think. Whatever that is.
Probably the Paul Sorvino one. Or maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not that one. I like Worf in a little hoodie. It's fun.
Yeah, no, it's a good look.
Or like Who Watches the Watchers probably is the ultimate one.
Oh, yeah. That one's pretty sweet. Though, yeah, I don't know. Worf chilling with this guy. That's pretty cool.
Come on, Worf. You're my brother. Come on. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Star Trek, because we do have to talk about Star Trek, and we'll do that right after this break for a word from our sponsors. We'll be back with more backtrekking.
Hi, I'm Mikan Hana.
And I'm Caliban.
And we're the hosts of the Sailor Noob podcast. I'm the expert.
And I'm the noob.
You're talking into the wrong end of the microphone.
Aye, aye.
Okay, every week we watch a new episode of Sailor Moon and learn about monsters, fashion, food, culture, and of course, the sailor warrior of love and justice, Sailor Moon.
All right, now, what is her rank? Is she an admiral or a rear admiral?
Okay, shh. The ad's almost over. We're a couple of magical people, and every week we Moon Prism Power make up a new episode.
Steady her midships. Steady as she goes.
Please stop that. Sailor Noob is available every Friday on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Shiver me timbers. Okay, we're back. It's time to talk about the Trek side of this equation. It's clear that Star Trek owes much to the works of its sci-fi literary forebears, Clark perhaps chiefly among them. The characters of Trek are often overawed by the discoveries they make in an endlessly fascinating universe, and though TV budgets often reduce the aliens in the franchise to lightly made-over character actors, the idea that the galaxy is full of wonders unknowable and yet unrevealed to man is decidedly Clarkian. However, one aspect of the novel and film 2001, namely the presence of the self-aware computer HAL 9000 and the existence of artificial intelligence, has gone almost completely unexplored in the annals of Trek. Oh, sure, there's Data and Peanut Hamper, and there's the occasional precocious computer that Kirk has to talk back into its place. But the currently accepted reality of the rise and utility of artificial intelligence is almost never closely regarded in Star Trek stories. Whether this was an oversight or intentional, it's difficult to say, but Star Trek Discovery tackled the issue of the rights and sentience of artificial intelligence in its 4th season episode, But to Connect.
You're making progress.
I've earned her utter indifference.
Aloof disdain is next.
We may be just at the beginning of our problems.
Two options are clear. Approach the 10C directly or destroy the DMA immediately.
We have to find another way. Diplomacy will save the most lives. I am sure of that.
I'm not.
The decision we make now will have a profound impact.
I was thinking about it. Is Data the ultimate self-hating android. He hates that he's an android.
Oh, you think like he should just accept how he is?
Well, I guess, I mean, like, why not accept that he is something more? I mean, spoiler, that's kind of what we get at the end of this episode, vis-a-vis Zora. But, like, if we're going with the Pinocchio myth, I guess Pinocchio did want to be a real boy pretty bad, and he gets his wish. But, like, Data's like, you know, he's more self-hating than Marvin, the paranoid android. Like, he knows everything about himself. He's very frank about the fact that he's an android, but gosh, he really just wants to be human.
Yeah. Well, I think he wants to fit in.
Yeah, well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's about conformity.
Yeah.
Data's still a teenager, and he really wants to fit in with the clique.
I think overall, it's like he wants to make connections with other people.
But to connect, yeah.
And so I think, you know, maybe there is a little bit of conformity there. I think maybe they could have done more episodes about how it's good that he is the way he is, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I get what you're saying.
I mean, nobody hates him. Well, I mean, sometimes he runs into a problem because a guy wants to pull him apart. But yeah, everybody, all of his friends accept, you know, what he is. But he's just like, man, I just want to just be human, whatever that means. Why do you think that Trek has never really committed to, until I guess fairly recently, having AI characters, exploring the idea of AIs, other than them just being something dangerous, like we see in Discovery Season 2 with Control?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, what do you think about, like, there's like the Doctor is kind of an AI type character.
That's true.
They definitely have approached it. But so I don't know. I feel like it's both something they have gone for, though. I guess both the Doctor and Data's case, it is just like, you know, they have a kind of a similar like desire to be seen as human. So I don't know. Whereas like now it's gone a different way.
I'm trying to think about the portrayal of artificial intelligences, intelligentsia, in fiction at the time. And, you know, obviously it had been mined well by Asimov at that point. It would go on to be mined by him. And he just presents, I think, robot intelligence or artificial intelligence as an interesting problem to be solved. It isn't until later that he, like with the Bicentennial Man and his, even some of his Foundation novels, that he really starts to get into artificial intelligence is intelligence too. Because before that, robots are just sort of like logic puzzles in the way that they're programmed. That provides kind of drama to the human characters, I think. But, you know, there's like books like, I think Colossus came out in the late 60s, and that's about like a Skynet-like computer that, you know, wants to nuke everybody. And there's plenty of computers in the original series that are evil, and Kirk's got to talk down and destroy.
They even make the joke in Lower Decks where it's like they got a whole archive of those type of guys.
Yeah, yeah. Just a big AI prison that they lock them all into. So yeah, I think maybe at that point it was vogue we were going through a phase, you know, of the killer computer, and we're arguably not completely out of that phase yet, but we've definitely started to explore the idea of AI being self-aware, being a possibly positive force, a kindred life form, and you know, I think I think Trek should be doing that. Mm-hmm. You know, we've got a whole galaxy of people with different configurations of silly putty on their faces, and so maybe it's hard to fit you know, machine intelligence or AI into that. You know, you've got Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and that's arguably a story about an AI seeking its God. It's very similar to 2001, as I'm sure many people have pointed out.
Oh yeah, I think
it's
we
just like
mentioned it.
It's a reverse 2001. Yeah. But that's fine.
Well, I was thinking like I felt like they had done it a little bit like with Data, and like also like when he makes a daughter, like he'll bring in other androids that he knows, and They talk about it, and with the doctor, and then when I watched this episode, it did make me think back to Measure of a Man. And so I had a different feeling in that, like, oh, this is like a new type, like a new way of addressing like a similar type of story they've done. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like it was something new, but it was like, you could clearly see it's somewhat inspired by Data, I think.
Yeah.
But what
I
if
could see
Data
that.
was the ship instead?
Yeah. It's funny because this is a bottle episode, right? Basically.
Yeah. I kind of
I
like
think,
that about that
it's hard to
episode.
tell these days because everything has a, sci-fi, they're in the volume, or it's got a CGI background or something like that. But it's basically takes place in two rooms, in the council chamber and in the room where they're debating Zora's future. And it's like a math problem that should work but has some kind of remainder or crashes your computer. I think this episode should work better than it does, but I don't think it works that great. And you can tell that they went all in on it because they've got these two seemingly unrelated plot lines, and they're both debates. They're both happening in different places, but they literally at the end, cross-cut between Stamets's speech and Burnham's speech in order to make the thematic connections explicit. And I don't feel like it works that well. Like, I don't feel like these two situations are as similar as they are trying to indicate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that.
It rings a little bit false, or at least a little contrived, I guess. I don't mean that like how that's usually. I mean, it's literally you can see the strings of them trying to. No, these both go together.
There were elements too of like, I liked the overall idea, specifically in the Zora story. Like, I liked the overall idea of the story, but elements within it felt contrived to me too. Like in the sense that you normally mean it as, not just the connection between the two. Like, I feel like they just like, maybe I'm just like, I kept thinking of Measure of a Man, but I was like, I felt like they made a few like leaps of logic and stuff that maybe you could get there, but I feel like they kind of glossed over discussions that I would have expected these characters to have.
Something that works in Measure of a Man and that they're lacking in this, and I'm not sure why, is that there's a real threat involved, to the point where you're like, what is wrong with this Maddox guy? Like, what toaster burned your toast that you want so passionately to just clearly take apart this nice, not joke-getting, violin-playing robot guy? Like, you just really want to do this bad. And so he is a villain, and he represents a real threat. Whereas in this, we've got David Cronenberg, and the entire time, David Cronenberg's like, no, let's listen to the killer computer. Like, he's on the computer side the entire time.
And at the end,
he literally says, I would have fired you, Stamets, instead of getting rid of the computer. So it's like, there was never any threat to Zora, who, by the way, we don't really even know.
Yes.
Like, she likes Fred Astaire movies. We know that. And that's like all we don't know Zora as a character. I mean, there's potential for like a cool character there,
right,
but there isn't somebody that we're worried about losing here.
The idea I like about it is I think it's supposed to show that, at least in this sense, Starfleet is like maybe more progressive. Like, oh, we sent like a therapist guy to like emotionally
and that's great.
That's fine.
That's great. But that's like, the Roddenberry box, that's like the Roddenberry Tesseract. It's like we've invented a new box that we can never escape. And I think that's a problem with a lot of the Discovery stories, is that obviously we take for granted that we are Starfleet and we're good, and nobody is ever going to make a bad decision. We're never going to be in danger of doing something wrong. And so it's just assumed that we'll work it out. And obviously we work it out. And at the end we say, you're alive and you want to join the crew and everything's great. And there's never a point where it could slip either way. There's never like a real threat in the story. And so many of their stories are like that. Even the other story is, how are we going to solve this problem? Well, obviously all the good and thoughtful members of the Federation are going to vote the right way. And even if they don't, Michael Burnham is going to give an amazing speech about how we've got to connect, and they're going to do it. And you just never believe that this could go wrong. You're just waiting for the obvious bad guy with a tattoo on his face to steal the thing so they can run off and do the bad thing.
And I think too, sometimes with Starfleet, like, I think we're supposed to get the idea that like we're supposed to question even the ideals of Starfleet, right? Like we're supposed to like, I think it's both believable that Starfleet is like can be a force for good in the universe in like a lot of the Trek series we like, but we also are supposed to put some of the things they say they believe to the test, and also show that like there's not a sole way to interpret it, you know what I mean? So like sometimes
there's no such thing as ethical Starfleet. Yeah, it's like that's literally what we're out here to question.
And I'm fine with the idea that they as an organization are like, it's like, okay, they're more accepting of like AI, but what I'm led to believe is that they shouldn't be, because it's been banned. You know what I mean? This is like a big...
Well, it's banned. So I thought about this a lot. It's banned in service of Starfleet, which you could argue is a form of racism. Like, obviously there are other AI species or machine species in the galaxy, possibly in the Federation. So to not let them serve in Starfleet is like discrimination,
right?
But
so that doesn't.
But Cronenberg.
Okay, sorry.
Cronenberg throughout his trial, it has nothing but respect for Zora as a life form, which I think is admirable. But also, shouldn't he be the guy trying to hunt this thing down and kill it, and then we convince him, no, she's good. Look, she can dream.
Like those two things don't make sense. I think it would have been fine if we're supposed to believe that Starfleet is skeptical of this, because they make a good point, which I think they gloss over, which is that she could just be like, I'm gonna blow up right now, and they could all die. And Saru has to throw a line where it's like, I have access that could cause destruction. But
I could hit the blow up button. Yeah, right.
No, you can't actually. Like, we've seen many times that it's not just, you can't just go computer blow up the ship or whatever. There's like a chain of command, which they bring up, but to be on that chain of command, they would say like, we don't really know Zora, right? So wouldn't you say like Data, like you would have to go to Starfleet. Like, I think I don't see how they wouldn't draw the conclusion, like, but instead they go, no, like, we're going to make you a specialist, which means like, even though we don't know you and you barely have served, like, you can just keep being a ship and it's no big deal. And
you're a ship, but you've got this code that lets you dream. You have a subconscious. And so therefore you are a new life form and not technically an AI. So welcome aboard. And I'm like, is that how that works?
No, it should be that ship's got to go to Starfleet Academy.
Right. It's just a big ship sitting in a chair at a desk.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's why the episode kind of bugs me a little bit, because I love all of these ideas. I love the idea.
Oh, no, yeah. The ideas are great. Yeah. The decisions the characters make about all of them don't make any sense, though. Yeah.
If in an episode of Lower Decks, they were like, we're going to do an episode where a ship, one of one of those Texas class ships or whatever, goes to Starfleet to, become part of a crew, like, I'd be like, fine, that's cool, that's funny, interesting. But in this, they immediately gloss over it. I feel like it would be fine if one character was like, well, I could cause destruction or whatever, but like as an argument, but shouldn't one other character be like, that's way different? Like, does Stamets even say that? I think he doesn't even say that.
He's well, again, it's the Roddenberry Tesseract, TM. That's my thing now. He comes in, turn up the music so she doesn't hear us, because I've seen 2001, and like he's set up as the guy who is against all of this, but yet he's like super nice Stamets, and he's a hero on the show, and we like him, so he can never really take the hard line of like, this guy's got to go. Like, Riker's not happy about arguing for Data's non-sentience, but he does it, and he makes a really good case out of it, and he almost wins. Like, he almost gets Data taken apart.
Yeah, like he...
And they just can't do that on a show where everybody is like a super progressive hero. And don't get me wrong, like you said, I like a lot of the elements of this. It's a little cheesy, but I like the idea that Zora can dream. Like there's a part of her brain that is a subconscious, essentially, that makes her different than other programs. I like the fact that she can program herself. Like she's like changes her core thing, which you would think for an AI is like, oh my God, we told her don't kill us. What if she says, no, kill them? But we believe and trust her that she won't do that because we have like context and experience with her. But it all comes out weird. It just sort of doesn't ring true. And I think part of the clue is in that do you think the episode gets that with Michael Burnham arguing on the side of this group that they should defend their principles and then she's trying to talk Book out of doing what he knows is right. Do you think that they realize at all that that's the exact opposite of like what she did in the Vulcan Hello, where she felt like, following the principles, or at least having the most effective communication with the Klingons would be to attack them. So I'm going to go against the entire group. Like this should be a commentary on her development as a character from the first episode up till now. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that the series even recognizes that they have, completed an inversion. Or maybe it's not an inversion because in both situations, she's just arguing for what she wants. She just happens to have everybody on her side this time instead of like last time.
Yeah, I think it could be. I think it could be interpreted as that, like that she's come along. But it's not a compelling argument, by the way. She's like, because everyone who's there, like, seems to like be annoyed with or hates the Federation, or not everyone, but those people
yeah.
who don't like them seem to really not like them. And she goes, like, I know we're not all Starfleet, but I think we can agree that its ideals are good. And I would be like, that's not the way to present it. Like, couldn't you? It would have been like, I know we're all Starfleet, but like, don't we all think these ideals are good, not Starfleet's ideals? Like those, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like you're presenting it as like, now I know you're not on board, but like, this is a good idea, right? It's like,
it's also, they set up, I guess they kind of cover themselves because the president says that she has to remain impartial. And I would argue, you're the leader of this body. Are you literally, is this just a true, it's not really a democracy because it's a representative democracy. I guess you were just doing what my people told me to do this. But like, it's a good thing they had Burnham there and she's so good at giving speeches, because otherwise, like, wouldn't the president give a speech? Is Burnham as a captain the victim of like 60 years of power creep, like within the captaincy? Because Kirk often gave speeches, but they weren't necessarily speeches that would change or influence anything. He could talk a computer to death. He would talk about how risk is our business, and so let's give our bodies over to these consciousnesses. Like, he would often like opine on what they're doing out there, but I wouldn't call him like the speech guy. Then we get to Picard. He's obviously the speech guy, and he doesn't become the action guy until the films, but then he's got both of those. By the time you get to like Archer will punch a guy out at the drop of a hat. He'll also give an angry speech about how we should be doing this or that. And so he's got all those powers in him. And so now the captain is just everything. By the time we get to Burnham, she does shoot the gun and swing from the rope and give the good speech. Whereas before I felt like those abilities would be given to different people in the cast. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So now she's like the ultimate, like, yes, we should get, whenever there's a problem, we should go to Burnham because she's a genius who can, kung fu somebody and she can do the speech and she can figure everything out.
Well, I think it's too because she is the leader of this group that can never be wrong. So she's the most right,
I guess. Yeah. Well, that leads to overly pat simplistic drama, I think, but that's just my opinion. So it's interesting to note. So obviously Control, bad news back in the old timey days in the 23rd century. We've talked about the conspicuous absence of most AI and you bring up the Doctor. That's a great point. Although when the Doctor is in his 7th year of operation, he still has to fight for publishing rights for his book. And there's a bunch of other doctors working in a mine. So clearly they're not that evolved on artificial life. 950 years later, or I guess 850 years later from that point, they're like, yeah, we got a ban on AI. You can't have AI in Starfleet. So clearly, like, nothing has really progressed all that much in almost 1,000 years.
Yeah, well, like the whole whatever happened there and picked that one Picard season that
Oh,
messed with
yeah.
things.
You think the Romulan, the tentacles from outer space, really fuck things up?
Yeah, they probably like, okay, let's cool it on this.
2 seconds after the last frame of Picard season 1, a crack team of Federation guys come in and just shoot all those gold people in the face.
Yeah, take them out. Well, I also think this recent episode of Lower Decks or whatever, the one with those AI ships probably is probably the most compelling factor.
Well, now we can talk about what's going on in modern Star Trek storytelling and how, for all of my complaints about not seeing it in early Trek, I don't know if modern sci-fi storytelling has evolved much on the issue of AI and seeing it as being an actual life form. I didn't see that Johnny Depp movie from a while ago where he turns into an AI or whatever, and I guess I never will at this point. But that was pretty negative on AI. Arnold is always the friendly Terminator, but he's always fighting Skynet, an AI with all the power. That's more of like a revolutionary kind of story, I guess, fighting against a larger power. But still, yeah, the robots they're still attacking.
Yeah, and there's like the Borg is kind of like not necessarily like that, but that's what makes me think of Terminator. Is it makes me think of like kind of disconnecting yourself from your humanity a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But I don't know if like AI as its own type of humanity. Yeah, maybe that. I mean, I think that's what I appreciate about the story is that it's trying to have a new type of character, I think like the Doctor or something that's going to but it's going to be even more accepted. But I just think the road they took to get there was kind of clunky.
I mean, I like the idea of Zora. I think that's a very interesting thing, like something about the ship, something about the sphere data, which is very poorly defined because the show's got other things to do, but just somehow like a living, if you will, creature sort of emerging from this primordial soup of data. I think that's a neat idea. And I don't know if they've talked about, she's voiced by a relatively successful actress. So I don't know if they've talked about like, having her be on the show, like Zora gets a body or something. It's kind of Mass Effect, I guess, but steal from the best. Mm-hmm. If they want to continue to do that, yeah, I would like to see that. But at this point, this is just like a weird break, a weird lacuna in a season where ultimately, what do? They go and they make contact with godlike aliens that they don't understand. And this should fit, like the chapters in 2001, this should fit in that like ongoing evolution of this idea of recognizing something as life when you don't necessarily, or getting somebody like the 10C to recognize you as life. But they're all like, I don't know, they're like beads on a string more than they are like a river that flows together.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's
my metaphor.
Yeah, I can see that comparison. Like it does feel like they're their own kind of little things.
I think that there's a reason people sometimes laugh. I've laughed about how every Star Trek show is like, what like mid-level soap actors can we get, to play our crew, the 7 people that'll be our crew. Yeah. And I think sometimes you discover things in actors, mid-level soap actors, that you didn't know were there. Other times, even if it's just a mid-level soap actor, they know how to show up, they know how to deliver complicated dialogue and do their job, and you sort of like, develop affection for them. But they've done this thing on Discovery where they don't really worry about where the actors are coming from. So they have a lot of inexperienced actors. They have a lot of like stage and musical actors. They have a lot of people who have like not done this kind of material. And I don't think it always pays off in the way that it should. Or I don't know. The people that like the show don't care about this. Maybe the people that make the show don't care about this. But I feel like you get a collection of actors who have to deliver complicated dialogue, or have to at least try to, everybody's the same. Everybody has the same reactions to everything. And that might be the script. But when they're talking to Zora, Stamets is like, well, I don't know what's going on with Zora. And Adira's like, oh, I don't know what's going on with Zora either. And everybody's just hitting the same beat. And then you get, the only guy not hitting the same beat is Cronenberg, and he's not hitting any beats because he's not an actor. He's just a Canadian
Yeah,
director.
That's what I was saying.
So-
It felt like they were going towards Stamets has a very specific insight as to what's bothering about this, and they do that for a bit. But then by the end, he's kind of like everyone else, where it's like, I just want it to trust you like you trust me or whatever. And it's like, and he even says like, I'm not like them, but I'm like, I feel like you're just like all of them. You're just, I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's enough different views in this. You know what I mean? Like, that's one thing I like about, you know, like in other Treks where they kind of are trying to synthesize a lot of different views, and they have to come up, there's some sort of like moral, not even compromise, just sometimes it goes in a certain person's way, or certain people have to like come to peace with different things. But in this, it kind of just feels like everyone gets their cake and to eat it too, you know?
Can I give you a really bullshit example of the opposite of that? So I've been playing The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt recently.
Okay.
This is why it's a bullshit example. And the writing in that game is great. Like, it's Mass Effect level writing. Like, even the small side characters have a personality. And I was playing, which is weird because, like, I would imagine they must just have like Western writers, right? Poland's West, I guess, or Ukraine or wherever they're from. But you'd think that like something would be lost in the translation. Sometimes you play a game that, you know, like a game that was made in Japan and the characters talk kind of weird in English, but they've got good localization, or they've just got like English speaking writers. And they were trying to figure out this problem. And there's like 3 or 4 characters, and they all have they feel differently about the problem. They've got a different approach to the problem, and they're all arguing about solutions. And eventually they boil it down to like 1 or 2 solutions out of the 4 that are suggested. But like, people have certain feelings about them, and they deride other people's solutions. Or maybe they're like, well, tell me more about that. And then they land on the 1 or 2, and the people whose solutions don't get picked are mad, but they're still going to have to help implement the solution because we're a group. Like, you could feel 4 different characters talking about something. This episode and a lot of other Discovery episodes feel like a monologue that is broken up and given to 4 different characters.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And you don't, I do think that the characters absolutely evince their individuality and their feelings in different other scenes. But when you get to these, like, you know, ham and egger scenes where it's like, we've got to get this stuff out, we've got to establish what the conflict is, I do feel like, it's just like 4 people all saying the same thing.
Well, especially because they go through everything and they set it up and they move on. So like, there's the thing like the failsafe or whatever. Like, it's not until the climactic moment that he like destroys it or whatever, but they do move on from that like pretty quick. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't feel like something that's on the table at the end. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, it's literally on the table, but
well, yeah. But they even say like, do they say like, aren't you forgetting something? Or I don't even know. But you go, oh yeah, like the thing that he was saying, like to blow it up. I feel like they already moved past that, you know? Because by the end, he's saying, I want to trust you, but I want you to trust me. And it's like, that's not something I feel like you would say to someone that you were like, also like, I would happily have a thing that will kill you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know.
And like, this is maybe hack, but like, what if he doesn't put it down the entire time? Because he's like, no, like, as soon as she vents all the air out of this place, I'm hitting this button, you know? And it isn't until the end that he puts it down because he accepts that she's alive. But that would make him a meanie. Yeah. And we don't want that.
And everyone should be nice to each other.
Well, you know, honestly, I think they're writing the show that the audience thinks it wants. Because here's another great example. Or great, maybe too much. But everybody hates Dr. Pulaski. And the reason they hate her is because she mispronounces Data's name and she treats him like a machine. In the first couple episodes in which she encounters him, and by the end of the 2nd season and she leaves the ship, like, they're kind of buds, low-key buds. And she, you know, she encourages him to bust up Kohlrami, you know, when they're playing Stratagema. Like, she understands him. She didn't get what he was, and she was discriminatory and mean to him. And then later on, she's not, because she accepts him. And that's like called character development. But we can't ever have that. We can't ever worry that like, oh, what's Stamets? How much toast got burned by his toaster that he hates Zora so much? Look, these are just, I think it's a side effect of having the story have to continue throughout every episode. Because if an episode happens, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we pick up next week and we don't know how far away we are from the episode that just happened, then we just know that like Stamets is a robot racist, if this happens and we move directly on. Mm-hmm. And everybody can't be whatever they need to be to tell the story this week.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think this whole ongoing story nonsense is garbage.
We gotta stop it.
I feel so old.
Gonna hit the button on it. The button reminds me. Yeah, me too.
I can't take it.
It reminds me of the movie 2010, which is the sequel to 2001, where they revisit Hal and they put a thing in him that if Roy Scheider hits this button, it will like blow up his logic center. And so I think they're kind of also, if you're a writer who was born in 2002 or 2003, and you're, what are we doing? AI? Okay, I'm going to watch 2001. Huh, weird. What was the bone? And then like, I should watch 2010 as well. And so I've seen like when people do references to 2001, they often are also doing references to 2010 as well.
Oh,
there's a part in 2010. There's a part in 2010 where we meet the guy that programmed the 9000 series, and he's talking to both Hal and a different, I think Sal, like a different 9000, and they both ask him like, if I die or if I go to sleep, will I dream? And that's, I think, supposed to be representative of the idea that they are something more, and that gets echoed, of course, in this with Zora's dream explicitly.
It is funny that they just like pull up the dream. Oh, she's dreaming of good stuff, Okay.
Oh,
nice.
That's nice. She's all alone. She's rolling a big donut and a snake wearing a vest. Yeah. All right. Well, look, this whole episode has been talking about technology, the technology of both the past, 2001, I guess the movie future, and the future of Star Trek. And on every episode, we discuss technology, the way that it sometimes helps the characters. It's often the complication the characters deal with. And we want to know how each would be different if we remove one of those technologies or add one of those technologies. We call this our technological exchange. We have a list that we work off of. The list goes like this. Phasers, holodecks, tricorders, transporters, warp drives, replicators, communicators, shields, advanced medical technology, and androids. Let's roll on our random number selecting device. And I get the number 6, replicators. If replicators existed in the world of 2001, how would it be different?
Well,
I think, first of all, we have to establish, I'm pretty sure they don't exist. Because they have this like reconstituted food, right? And they might have some way to 3D print stuff, but they don't have like replicators, energy, matter transference.
There's something about Star Trek where it's like, there's like the kind of boundless resources almost, even though they're not really, but like.
Yeah, they don't have boundless resources.
Yeah, you see like they're charging you for a phone call and,
Right.
There's a hotel.
Yeah.
So clearly I feel like if you have a replicator, well, maybe not, but I feel like it's likely that helps get rid of a lot of want and need,
Okay, so are we looking is it fundamentally changed? Are we looking at a united Space Force? There's no scarcity anywhere because we backdate all this. So the entire planet's Russian communist, because Russia would never fall prey to shortages or anything like that. But at the very least, let's say there is a international Space Force. The Russians and Americans are working together along with other nations, and we don't have the Cold War aspect there. But what happens then when they are digging in Tycho Crater and they find a monolith?
Maybe just my theory that maybe they have the more kind discussion with the AI, and they all get what they want, and then then the mission goes fine, and they go talk to the aliens.
That brings up a good point. was Dave Bowman's experience exactly what was supposed to happen? We talked about how maybe the godlike monolith aliens like set this sort of trap, a long time ago, and they like just checked it one day and they're like, oh shit, something's in the trap. Do you remember what we're supposed to do? Maybe they never really had a plan, or maybe this was always it. You're going to go in here, you're going to wear a robe, you're going to become a baby, and they'll give you a space baby.
Right. Maybe it's like you have to...
Was that always what it was supposed to be? Like, was this their plan?
I think not, because only because I got really hung up on how...
even Science God doesn't know what he's doing.
Right. Yeah, it could be, or it could be, yeah, like maybe it is like we're arriving to give you some sort of gift of like rebirth into a new type of being, but first you gotta kind of die, and okay, you're not old enough, so
okay,
we'll keep you
you're
here.
dead. Now you'll be a baby. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. Okay. Don't worry. We can speed it up a little bit.
Yeah, we'll speed it up.
Like very literal now.
Yeah, with editing. Yeah, they've got the technology of editing. Yeah, not having like a lack of resources. Maybe you could like replicate, a new circuit for HAL or something like that. Something that I found was really interesting, and I had not read the book, so maybe this is explained in the book, but is the sort of deception with the communications array. And what HAL is playing at when he suggests that it's going to fail, and I love the ambiguity, don't get me wrong, but you think about things that are ambiguous, like, was he planning on sabotaging it? Was it really going to fail? Just not yet. And so he sort of jumped the gun, and that made them doubt him. Was he specifically trying to cut himself and the ship and the astronauts off from Earth so that he could talk to them, privately, like they did in D-Pod? Like, what was up with the communications array?
Yeah, it could be either it was him testing them. That could be. See how they would react.
Oh, if they still trusted him?
Yeah. Or I think honestly it could have been that he just made an error, because he's becoming sentient. Maybe that's part of it, is that,
is being fallible.
He can't comprehend what he's thinking or feeling. So maybe, it's affecting his day to day. And then once he realizes that they, want to deactivate him or whatever, he goes into self-preservation mode, I guess.
There's so much technology like on display, and this would have like, in the middle of the space race, this would have driven like audiences wild to like see all this cool stuff that they knew that they were going to have in 2001. But like really one of the messages of the film, or something that we see, is like technology inevitably leads to violence. You've got, it's nice that Moonwatcher knows how to use a club, but what do we get? We get dead monkeys. And then we immediately fast forward to nukes in orbit, and we create HAL, this tool to help us, the ultimate tool, and it immediately decides that maybe we don't need so many humans around. And so the dangers of technology is something that we've talked about this before a lot on the show, that Trek will never sign off on. We're doing a technological exchange segment because Trek is very pro technology, to the point of blindness, and calling out visionaries like Elon Musk, in the 23rd century. So I think like that's something that the movie, I don't think it's its main focus. I think it's more about that search for God, but it is definitely a side thing that it's trying to say. So if they had replicators and the ability to create anything at any time, like I wonder what they would have come up with if you're not limited with your resources.
Maybe they just create a big like roller coaster, Part of me thinks maybe they don't get out there because they just build the sickest theme park.
The Great Space Coaster. Yeah.
What do we need out there in space? We got a sick roller coaster back here.
Forget it.
You can go to the moon, maybe. I don't know.
Jupiter to mine stuff. Yeah, yeah. I hate to keep being the guy that says you got to check out 2010, but 2010 does. it answers a question that like everybody's like, please don't answer this question. We don't need an answer. And it's like, I'll answer it. And, you know, it's part of the action here is that there is life on Europa, right? There is primitive life in the oceans of Europa. And so part of the godlike aliens mission is not only to foster races that they think would be, you know, good additions to the intergalactic community, but also to keep them from hurting other races. And so that's a totally new side thing that comes in that second movie. We don't know how they feel about Hal. Although, interestingly, in the books, Hal eventually is merged with Frank Bowman, I think. He becomes Hal Man.
See, that's what I think you were saying. He didn't want to reveal it, but it's like partially about, you know, humanity and technology coming together.
The adopting of adding technology to the human body. Yeah,
it's almost like, well, and I think what I like about all aspects of it is it sometimes it's like it shows like the kind of some of the grittier sides of these certain things, but more overall presents it just as it is. It's just like a reality of life, like the violence of, you know, the technology and stuff like that. But I also think just with the idea of the answering that question, I think kind of fits alongside that still too.
Yeah. Like what, you know, great, we're going to get technology, but like it doesn't change what your intentions are. And to be fair to Moonwatcher and his tribe, like they just wanted their waterhole back and maybe like beat up the next leopard that comes around. Okay. But their intent was to do harm. I found this amazing thing. We could crack open coconuts with it, but no, I'm going to crack open some skulls.
Yeah.
And I think so it's significant that at the end of 2001 that Dave he's just going in there to explore. Like his life has been threatened. His friend is dead. The computer's dead. Everybody's dead. But he doesn't go in there with like a gun. Like once he gets there, he doesn't try to shoot the alien in the face. He's just like, I'm here to figure out what the fuck this is all about. I've gone through all of this. I need to meet the goddess now, please. Yeah. And they respond in kind.
Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely like it almost could be like to move forward, we become like a Borg-like being, but it's not like good or bad. It's just like it is what it is, you know?
Yeah, I think so. And
I think it being a baby is cool because I think if you look at it's
yeah, but why wasn't it a cyber baby?
Cyber baby, yeah. Well, I think what's important is that it's like familiar because we see in the beginning of the movie we see the dawn of man, but it's like, you know, apes kind of look like us, but you look at that and you're like, that's not a human, you know? And so now I think whatever the space baby will become by the end of whatever its existence is will probably resemble nothing. It won't look like us at all. You know, maybe it'll just be a cube or something.
Yeah. And that baby there was a photographer who was like taking pictures of the babies in the womb. That was kind of a fad back then.
Oh, saying they didn't put a baby in space.
No, but I mean, it was inspired by, the work of that photographer. Give me a space baby. Yeah. All right, let's talk about the episode, But to Connect. And if we remove replication technology and honestly, boundless resources from the world of Star Trek Discovery, what happens? Let me posit something. It becomes a way better episode and possibly a better series.
I think,
no personal transporters, no, holographic comm badges, and all that stuff.
I also think it's kind of something they were trying to do with like, there was the burn and now we're putting things back together. So I can see that being a reason for them going along, like doing things that sometimes you wouldn't normally expect to see in like Star Trek or something. Like
it's Voyager all over again. It's them teasing the idea that maybe things aren't going to be so clean and great, and then backing out.
That would be perfect. For example, they could go, okay, we have determined Zora is like a sentient being and deserves to be treated with, you know, respect, but we can't just say, okay, you're now the ship. You are a person and you're now the ship. And you can go on these missions, even though everyone else, went to Starfleet or whatever. But then they could come in and say, hey, but this ship is the only ship that can do this. We need this. Like, maybe it's breaking protocol, but maybe we got to do it for this mission, and they could still do it. I'm not mad that they did it. It's more of like, then it would have actually added some stakes to it if they actually talked about it and questioned it. It'd feel more real, I think.
Having not boundless resources would make possibly the situation with the DMA more serious. God knows in our new universe if Tarka can even create what he wants to create, but without the ability to just replace ships and things that have been destroyed by the DMA, the preservation of resources becomes more important, and a thing that is literally sucking up resources, stealing minerals from our parts of space, might be more threatening to the fledgling Federation, where they're like, look, we can vote on this, but we have to stop this thing. We've only got so much stuff to rebuild the Federation the way we want to. Also, like, not being able to just beam up a kill switch for Zora might make it more interesting. So then part of like Stamets's role in the episode is like, okay, you guys keep talking about keep talking about this. And then he runs out and like crawls into a Jeffries tube, and he's like climbing through the guts of the ship, like trying to find the box that he can put a bomb on to like blow up Zora if it goes wrong.
Do an episode where Starfleet wants him to build one, and it's actually sponsored, and there's like a moral conflict there. He's where he can.
Oh my God, that's so much better.
Yes.
Why didn't they do that, Gooey?
Because everyone's got to be nice, because we are Starfleet and we're all nice.
But he's nice because he says no at the end, right? This is short little guy, Bashir's role in the second half of DS9, right? Like, bad people keep coming to him and saying, you don't know how important it is that you have to do this. And he's like, okay. But then by the end of the thing, he's like, I'm not inter arnum linoleum aluminum. I'm not doing that. Are you crazy? And that would be perfect. Why does Cronenberg have to be a nice guy? He comes and goes, look, I don't know if you know this, but your ship is alive and she's going to kill all of you. So you need to build a bomb to stop that. And so the whole episode is like him going, do I build the bomb? Don't I build the bomb? And then he could stand up at the end and be good. That's so much better.
I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's the show that people think they want, because I think they're making it with the old criticism. I don't even know if it's criticism, but the trope in mind that people have mentioned of like the Badmiral. And I think they're like, no, our show won't have that fatal flaw the old Star Trek's had, where an admiral could come in and be bad.
The idea that authority is corrupting, I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I think like that's just with a lot of things now, where it's like, we got to remake it and take out the flaws that aren't really flaws. They're essential or like part of certain stories.
So frustrating.
Right, sorry.
It makes no. You make a great point, and it makes so much sense. And that is, I think, every time we talk about Discovery, we have to try to fix it. And I think that's another thing that goes on the work order for fixing Discovery.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's frustrating.
Because,
all right.
I want to
anyway.
it. I was watching it, and I like elements of it. And I was like, oh, this could be so cool,
Yeah. They'd have to stop off and buy cat toys for Grudge. You can't just make them up on the replicator. That's the answer to that question.
That was a nice scene. Cat toy.
All right. Well, and I did like I don't know if this applies to the rest of the episode, but she says, I can only control the toy. I can't control the cat. I was like, all right, give yourself a high five for that.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Don't know how it applies to the rest of the episode, but okay. Well, I think that's it. I think we've covered everything that we could possibly attempt to cover for this movie and this episode. Should we tell people what's coming up on the next episode of Backtrekking?
Yes. So in the next episode,
speaking of things that are hard to encompass, what's coming up on the next episode?
We're talking about Star Trek.
Yeah. We'll just talk about Star Trek.
No, we're gonna talk about the influence of the Horatio Hornblower character as the inspiration to Captain Kirk and that kind of adventure. So we're gonna talk about the novel Beat to Quarters, And then
Yeah.
Star Trek, we're just going to talk about Star Trek.
Yeah. Beat to Quarters is the American title. The Happy Return is its UK and Commonwealth title, if you are trying to read along with us. It's a short novel. I mean, it's almost a novella. It's about as long as Red Badge was. So it's a pretty quick read. It's pretty engrossing. And yeah, we will talk about how the character of Hornblower influenced really all of the original development of Star Trek. So we'll be talking about Star Trek and talking about Horatio Hornblower on the next episode.
Yeah, just start. There's got to be there should have been a TOS episode maybe we picked, but it's probably fine.
Yeah, but I am grateful because we've had some very pointed sort of exegesis of some of these episodes, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about Star Trek in a broader sense.
Yeah,
I
that's
think.
true.
Definitely at this point, looking back on, like 3-4 years of our show, maybe this will be something of a retrospective of our work here on the podcast as well.
Yeah, I look forward to
No
that.
pressure. Yeah. Well, that's it for this week's Backtrekking. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, tell a friend and follow us, please, at Backtrekking on Twitter and tell us what you think that we should look at in future episodes. And Gooey, tell the people where they can find you online.
I'm on Twitter. You can find me at GUIFame.
And I'm at K-A-1-I-B-A-N on Twitter. You can find all of the material and shows on the Just Enough Trope Network at Just Enough Trope on Twitter. And I wanted to put a small plug in here for one of the podcasts on the network. It's a revival of a podcast called Craft Disservices, where we talk about the quote-unquote bad films of cinematic history, films that critics rejected but audiences embraced, which often features cult films, unappreciated masterpieces, and just personal favorites. That show is back up and running. You can find more information at craftdisservices.com or at craftdisservice, no S, on Twitter if you're interested in that. And that is it for us. We will see you soon, and until then, keep on trekking.